Welcome to the True Wealth Investors Real Estate Podcast. Creative investing strategies to help you build true wealth. I'm your host, Chad Harris. All right, welcome everybody. I am so glad to have you back to the True Wealth Investors Real Estate Podcast. I always appreciate you tuning in and listening, and I'm glad you're joining me. As always, I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel, leave me a rating or review on Apple iTunes. That would really help other people find us and help me serve more people, which is always the goal. I'll always, if you want to leave a comment or you want to email me any questions, feel free. Send them to chad@truewealthinvestors.com. All right, so today I have a really exciting guest, Mark Dolfini of Mark Dolfini Strategic Coaching. Mark and I have crossed paths multiple times, just running in the same circles in mastermind and speaking. And I've heard him present and speak on developing systems, which is something I am really passionate about. So I'm excited to have him. Welcome, Mark. Glad you're here.
Man, it's good to be here. Good to be anywhere, really, given the frozen tundra that's outside. But
Yeah, it's a little rough.
It's a little rough. But you know what? If you're watching this in the summer, we're then maybe it's gotten better by then. But my goodness, it's been a rough one here in the Midwest. That's for sure.
Yeah, so I'm glad to have you. We've spoken a couple times. I really resonate with your real estate background, your passion for helping people, and just your desire for systems. Trying to get away from that solopreneur mentality towards the business owner, which so many people struggle with. So I know now you've kind of come from the real estate space and are transitioning more into business owner coaching.
Mm-hmm.
But how did you get started in the real estate space? What was that beginning like? What types of investing did you get started with?
Yeah. So it was about 1,000 years ago, it seems. I got out of the Marine Corps and wound up here in the Midwest. I grew up on the East Coast in New York. The Marine Corps was very good to me, but I knew there had to be a better life out there somewhere, and I was right. And got out and came to the Midwest, where I went to Purdue University. Loved it here. Loved the Midwest. I feel so, I fit in here so well. And so I started buying real estate pretty much my first year here in the Midwest. And I went about, I bought quite a bit of real estate with no money down. I was trying to learn how to figure all out, like how do you, what do I need to tell the banks, and, all that game. I'm sure, no one's ever done that hustle before, right? But, how much do you make? Well, how much do I need to make? When you answer that question, ask me no questions, I'll tell you no lies.
What kind of duck do you want me to look like?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that was, of course, back before 2008, when the entire mortgage world changed. This is back in 97. But I've been buying real estate up until that point. And by the time I graduated from college, and I'd done a lot of, some owner financing, some wheeling, dealing, and so forth. And I had, I think, about a dozen units right as I was getting out of college. So when I was in the Marine Corps for 4 years, still a young man. By the time I got out, I had about a dozen rental units. And that's really when, so I had about $500,000 worth of real estate, about a dozen or so, rental units. So they were lower end properties for sure. But I say I went to Purdue University, but that is really where my real education started. Because if there was a way to do it wrong, if there was a worse way to do it wrong, I'm not sure that there was a worse way anybody could have done it wrong. Every now and again. So I used to run and I still have it, landlordcoach.com. And there's some resources on there for systems and stuff like that. But if every now and again, I'll get someone that sheepishly comes to me and like, oh, I let my son's friend move into this rental property, and man, I just knew I shouldn't have, but I did it. I felt bad for the guy and all this other stuff. And I'm like, and let me guess, he stopped paying and now you have no idea what to do with him, right? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, man, don't worry about it. I've made way worse mistakes than that, right? So I try to one up them with my losership so they feel better about it. But honestly, I really did. I made about every possible mistake that you could make in this business, and some of them I made 2 and 3 times because the first couple times didn't hurt enough. But and I say that just because I don't want people to feel badly about what they're doing. They don't want. I don't want. I want them to own their mistakes so they can honestly move forward from it, truly own it, so they can say, you know what, yeah, I just need to make sure I don't do that again. And when I wrote the Time Wealthy Investor 2.0, it's a book of mistakes. It's a book of all the stuff not to do. And so as I built that portfolio up, I went out into the corporate world and I fit in there like a square peg in a round hole. And as I was building up this portfolio, of course, 9/11 happened, and I decided to kind of go out on my own, and all these different things, were going on in the world. But I was able to get up to 92 rental units, pretty much through this hodgepodge of willing dealing and owner financing, which was about a $6.5 million portfolio.
Yeah. So I guess a couple questions. One, how did you, so many people struggle with getting past that first 15 or 20.
Right.
And how'd you break through and scale to 90? And then also, who were you around at that point? Were you hanging around other real estate investors? Did you hire a coach? Was it just pure force and sheer willpower, that got you through it? Or what was that process like?
um, yeah, so it was, I would love to say, it was an amazing and beautiful scene, and it was a Hallmark movie at the end, and guy gets the girl. No, it was awful. And it was pretty much through sheer willpower that I got there. And had I not been a single man with no kids at home, no other responsibilities really, I have no idea how I would have gotten much, past 20 or 30, no, let alone 92. Because you're 100% right. There's that stuck that people get to, and like you said, it's somewhere between that 5 and 15 to 20 range that they get stuck. And I think it's a number of factors. Many of them think it's the financing part that gets them stuck, and maybe to a certain degree that is true. In my truth, I felt like it's managing the multiple lines of complexity that I did such a terrible job at, but I grew so quickly that it didn't catch up to me until later. So, for example, one of the things that I didn't recognize is that for every line item. So I'm gonna go to my accounting brain here for just a second. I actually have a degree in accounting, and that's and every line item. When I talk about a line item on the income statement or P&L, it's the same thing. But every line item, right? You have your revenues, your expenses. So those line items would be like, okay, so mowing, that's a line item. It might be painting and cleaning of the units, right? Those are two different line items, right? It might be showing the property, like the leasing fees, right? Those would be line items. Well, for every line item that I didn't budget for, guess what? That was a job I just created for myself. So if I didn't budget for leasing the property, guess what? I created that job for myself, and it was a job that paid terribly. Because I didn't budget for it, it's got to come from somewhere. Well, when I'm working a job, I could subsidize my units, in my bad decision making with my job. But going out on my own, it was horrible. I didn't buy the units right to begin with. So that was the biggest problem, is that I had created not just one job for myself. I created hundreds of little jobs for myself. I created mowing jobs. I created showing jobs. I created leasing jobs. I created maintenance jobs, all of these little jobs, right? So
That's something that as you scale, when you have a handful of them, well, leasing's not that big a deal because you don't lease that often and you don't realize the importance of it. But then as you scale, you realize you are leasing constantly. There's constant turnover and you're constantly mowing, you're constant, all of those tasks add up. So I can relate.
oh, Brother, you said, you hit the nail on the head with that, because that's, you don't realize it until you hit a certain number, and it's those multiple lines of complexity that you don't realize. Like, I don't know how many school teachers that you may have in your audience, but, or maybe you know a school teacher, but what do they say is the optimal classroom size? Somewhere around 20. That's optimal. Well, why? Because when you get over 20, right? Think about this for a second. It's the typical 80-20 rule. You're going to get 80% of your problems from 20% of your students, right? So you get 20% of your students, you got 4 students that can cause interactions. They don't just interact with each other, they interact with student number 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and all the other students, right? So they create, I mean, so when they get above 20 units, or, or 20 students in that classroom, and it's like, well, I'll just take on 5 more. It's not a big deal. 25 can't be that much harder than 20, except until it is. And until they go, oh my gosh, why is this class feel so out of control? Right. And that's the reason, because they're not managing those multiple lines of complexity that can all interact with one another. In the how does this relate to the rental world? Well, when you pick up one property, you also pick up one resident, right? So that's not just 2 lines of complexity. It's a line of complexity between you and the property, you and the resident, and then the line of complexity between the resident and the property. That has to be managed too. So you get one property, you get 3 lines of complexity, right? So all of a sudden you start picking up 10, 12 units, right? Now you've got 30 or 36 lines of complexity that you have to manage, in addition to this thing called life. And if you have a spouse that wants you around once in a while, and if you have children that want your attention once in a while, and you're not going to show up with what's called, sunset fatigue. And sunset fatigue is basically when you show up after a long day, and guess what? Your family gets like, do they get the best part of you or the worst part of you?
Yeah, they get the leftovers, right?
They're getting the worst. They're getting the left. They're getting whatever's left, and usually whatever's left is usually not the best part of you anyway, right? So you're grouchy, you're tired, we have an 18-year-old, my 18-year-old son. He just graduated from school, from high school. We've got a 15-year-old son, and we have a 1-year-old, right? So,
Wow.
and that was intentional. We wanted to expand our family. We decided we wanted to try, and we got Liliana, and so we have 2 older boys and a younger daughter. And I'll tell you what, my 1-year-old daughter does not care that I had a bad day, that I'm tired. That does not care. So it's a lot of, she's a lot of fun, but my gosh, I'm like, how do you do this all day? She's like, welcome to my world,
You better bring your A game, right?
There is no place for B game. Dad, leave it at the door. I don't care, because I am here to play, and I'm just going to bring you the box. It's hysterical, because right now she shuffles on her knees real fast. So she can walk, but she's just doesn't want to quite yet. But she's close. She's close. So, but she'll grab this giant bag of Legos, and she's on her knees, and she's just dragging this thing like crazy baby strength over to me. And don't care what your day was like, but you're playing with me right now,
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. But those are all the multiple lines of complexity that we have to manage. And then if you've got a job, you got all those lines of complexity. So what I'm saying is, like, you can create this this crazy busy business that you bought for yourself, all these jobs that you bought for yourself, and it becomes its own prison. So I see that happen quite often, where people are like, man, I could just get out on my own if I could just get the financing. And rarely is that the case. Not saying it's not always the case, and some of your folks may have that side figured out, the systems and processes figured out, but it's pretty seldom.
Well, and the way you worded it too, that you eventually found yourself in a prison. I don't remember, but that concept that you don't realize you're building it when you're building it. It's only once you get down the road and you think, oh no, what have I done? Right?
You're like, did I really mean to put concert? Well. Yeah, did I really mean to put concertina wire around this? Because gosh, this is a terrible prison.
yeah. What have I done to myself? So when you were in the process of that, I always like to get a perspective of when you were growing your business and it was all effort and sheer will. What did other people think about what you were doing? Family, friends, people you were around.
Well, I'm not gonna lie, man. I wore that, that like a badge of honor. I'm out there flexing that hustle muscle, and at the time, I was very confused between achievement and fulfillment.
Hmm.
And I didn't recognize that until much, much later when I was really getting, I had all these achievements, like look at the number of units that I had and look at all of this stuff. And, I'm bringing in 60 to $65,000 a month in rent revenues. From the outside looking in, people doing the back of the napkin bar math, dude, that guy's crushing it, and look at all this stuff he's doing. And I'm out there, I'm wearing this like a badge of honor. Now this is social media wasn't quite what it is today, but very busy running around doing all this different stuff, getting up at 6 in the morning and coming back, dragging myself by my own collar in at 11 o'clock at night and doing the same thing 7 days a week, and, for forever. That's what people saw on the outside looking in. But I'll tell you, I looked at my life. I was like, how in the world am I going to do this another 25 to 30 years when these mortgages start paying off? I'll be dead long before then. I mean, and quite frankly, that's what almost happened. I almost worked myself, because I was in this prison, I almost worked myself into an early grave. And I don't say that in any flippant way. I actually got double pneumonia and I almost died from almost working myself to death.
Wow. I know
Yeah.
that for me, there was a period where I thought that was just par for the course. Like it was
Right.
what had to be done to build the business.
Right.
And it wasn't until later when I met other people who didn't live that way. And I thought, wait a second, what are they doing differently?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
You had asked me earlier about being around a group of investors or things like that. And we had a very small group of people that we met. I don't live in a very big town. I live in Lafayette, Indiana, which is home of, West Lafayette's the home of Purdue, but I live across the river in Lafayette. And, there's 150,000 or so people in this town, and it's a great town. I love living here. And we don't have a lot of, like they had a RIA group down in Indianapolis, but we had a small meetup here, maybe 5-10 people of investors and just trying to learn how to get things going and stuff like that. But but I was the guy. I was like big man on campus, and in that group, they didn't have anywhere near the scale that I did. But and I kind of wore that. I mean, I got a lot of significance from that. I felt really important, being the guy that owns all these units. Man, I'll tell you what, there's something real sexy about having 20 or 30 units that are paid in full, that are maybe a little bit better quality, that I wasn't buying these crack shacks and putting all this money and everything into it. There's a lot of sexiness around that other model than the one that I had done. So maybe if I had done that a little bit differently, maybe I wouldn't have such a compelling story to tell.
oh, well, there you go. It's all about the story, right?
Bad decisions always make good stories. So kids, remember that.
So where did you go from there? Once you had 90 units, you were trying to figure out the systems and the
Yep.
way to simplify those processes.
Yep. Yep.
What was next?
So, at the time, heading into 2008, I had 92 rental units, which is, like I said, it was about $6.5 million worth of real estate, and most of that was leveraged. Most of it was fully leveraged, and I could make an argument that it was, like I could say I probably had about maybe, $6 million in loans, about $6.5 million in real estate. But the problem was I was so over leveraged, not just in money but in time. So when the labor market started to fall apart in 2008, during the mortgage crisis, it was really a labor market crisis. I mean, people were just losing their jobs, and I was dealing with a very buy here, pay here type avatar. And people who had access to 401ks and that sort of stuff, they could borrow that money. These weren't the type of people that I was working with. I was working with people who were very, very, day labor type folks. So of course they stopped paying their mortgages, or they stopped paying their rent. Well, I went from $65,000 a month, we'll say, pretty much cut in half, like $30,000 a month. So that's 60,000 or 65,000 I had coming in, depending on my vacancy at the time. But let's say it was 60,000, that was cut in half. So all of a sudden I had $30,000 to try to figure out, and this is like a fishes and loaves moment. And I'm trying to figure out how to cover all the bills, and of course just the balls. I couldn't keep all the balls in the air. So I started losing properties pretty quick. And in about 8 months time, I went from that $6.5 million portfolio where I had 92 rental units, and I pretty much wiped out most of that. Went from about 6.5 million down to about 1.5 million in about 8 months. So I lost a tremendous amount of value. I lost a tremendous amount of real estate. Didn't declare bankruptcy, and so of course I'm working harder, just trying to keep things up, keep all the balls in the air. And that's when I was working. I wasn't just working almost nonstop. I mean, I was working almost 20 hours a day, and I would stop at a Lowe's parking lot, grab some sort of lunch out of a can, or whatever I could get at the time, and take a quick 30-45 minute nap in the parking lot of wherever I could, and go back to work. I mean, there was even times I was in the middle of turning a unit, and I thought, okay, I could drive home, which is 15 minutes, drive back, which is another 15 minutes. That's 30 minutes of sleep. I'll just sleep here. Right. I mean, those are the calculations that I was going through. It was absolutely maddening. So anyway, I ended up with double pneumonia, and I got to the hospital, and they admitted me, and I'm laying in this hospital bed, and the hospitalist comes in, and I'll never forget what she said. She looked at me, and I was 30. It was in my late 30s. I think I was 37 at the time. And she looked at me and she said, "People who look like you don't lay in hospital beds like this." She's like, "I think you need to do a real examination of your life." And she kind of left. And she didn't know what it was that I did. She didn't know anything about me, didn't know anything about my business or anything. And those words rang, and that resonated, that bell rang for a while inside my head. And really started to get a real good look at it. And that's where I started to figure out, and this was kind of the premise of the book that I wrote about in the Time Wealthy Investor 2.0, was, what am I doing this all for in the first place? I mean, I proved that I could work in the corporate world, even though I didn't really like it. I had a degree in accounting. I could go out. I could easily make a living doing that. Maybe it wasn't as fulfilling, but man, it had to be better than what I was doing. So I really got thinking about what I was doing this all for. And it's kind of like that beginning with the end in mind that Stephen Covey talked about. But really, what was my vision for my life? What was I doing this all for in the first place? And then I started to think about reverse engineering this business that I was going to rebuild in its place. What would I need? What would I need to build in its place in terms of infrastructure and just the basics of computer software and, phone systems that didn't look like this, and, all the things that were, that I didn't have. And then finally, what processes did I need in place that I wasn't so much in reaction mode, but I could be proactive. I could actually have a business that ran and it wasn't all in my head. So that's where I came up with what I refer to as the VIP method, vision, infrastructure, process, that I wrote about in the Time Wealthy Investor 2.0. So vision is got a couple of different elements to it, but vision is specifically what it is that you want to do. Like, what are you trying to accomplish in your life? And it has nothing to do with how you make money. So if I say, what is your vision? And many times if I'm on a RIA group or something like that, I'd say, oh, well, what are you trying to accomplish? What's your vision? And they always say, oh, I want to get 100 rental units. By the way, it's always in increments of 25, always.
Yeah.
And I'm like, really? You need exactly 100 rental units to live your vision. How about that, right? But whatever it is. And then I would ask, so 99 wouldn't do it for you? And they're like, well, yeah, I mean, 99 would be okay, but 100's a round number. And I'm like, no, I get 100's a round number. I mean, I have a degree in accounting. I get that, but how about 99, how about 97? I think 97's a prime number. How about that? Would 97 work for you? And I would keep whittling it down until what they realized is what they were doing is they were confusing the number of rental units with the level of life output they think that would buy them. So when they stopped, comparing the number of rental units, I said, look, man, instead of 100 rental units, what if instead you wanted to make $37,114.12 per month? Is that a clear vision? And it doesn't really matter as long as it's in line with your core values and, and how you want to do business. But does it really matter at that point if you had 100 rental units or 1,000 rental units? Would it matter? Why not do it with less, create far less complexity, way less options for things to go sideways? Now I'll give you some license for, some diversification of income streams. I will totally get that, right? But do you really need to have that many more? Because for me, I had so much complexity in my life. I was like, man, I do not want to go back to this. So that's about personal vision. So personal vision is really like, if you were in a room with all these people speaking about you at your eulogy, or at your funeral, what would they say? What would you want said? What would be the message that you would want people to carry outside the room if you were speaking your 100th birthday speech? What would that message be? What would that look like? And would it have anything to do with income generation? For most people, it wouldn't. So
Yeah.
once,
Too many
yeah, go
people
ahead.
kind of save that till the end. They think once I hit a certain income level, then I'll live the life I want to live, right? That's kind of the way retirement is pitched.
Yeah.
Endure until the end, and then you can live that life you've always dreamed of, or that vision for what your life would be. So I love the idea of starting with that in the front and
Yeah.
building a business around it.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, most people have a way easier time coming up with their business vision. Business vision isn't irrelevant. It just can't come first. Because when you create a business vision before you create a personal vision, you end up creating a life that exists to serve your business. Oops. Right? Ask me
Yeah.
how I know. I did that wrong. Did that way wrong too, right? So I had this business that existed, like I existed to serve the business, and that's backwards. Our businesses exist for us. So, and I will tell you that, I've gotten into this conversation many, many times. Well, let me make 30 grand a month, and then I'll decide this awesome life I'm going to have. And I'll tell you, man, I sit in a few different masterminds with people who make a tremendous amount of money, and this is the thing they struggle with. This thing right here, this personal vision. And defining that. And I hear like, well, I just want to have options, man. I just want to have options. Okay, to do what? To do what? Like, even if it's just to have options because you like variety as one of your 6 human needs, like variety is something that you embrace. Just what would that look like? Is it jumping out of airplanes holding baby sharks? Or is it bungee jumping? Is it go-karting? Is it digging wells in Kenya? Like, what do you want to do? Like, what do you want your life to look like? And that right there is the thing that most people struggle with most. And that is a constant thing that people have difficulty with.
I can see that, you know, naturally people think, well, once I build my business to a certain level and I have a certain level of income, then I'll have the freedom to design my life.
Right.
And in reality, that it's usually harder at that point, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Once you have that business built and you have the responsibilities and the structures and the people relying on you, um, you feel less free than when you started.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unfortunately,
That's exactly right.
how do you balance? What's your perspective? Because there are times that I think you do need to sacrifice and endure seasons of difficulty or seasons of overworking or whatever it is. Do you think there are periods where you need to do that in building the business, or is it design the vision day one and live it out? How do you see that?
Both can be true. Look, we all go through seasons. I think I love your word that you use as seasons because that's actually the word I was going to use. And I think this is why we get along so well. I think we could finish each other's sandwiches,
Yeah.
but but the thing that everything's a season, right? My bride and I are going through a season, and we have like the season we had, and I don't want to say it was bad. We went through a little bit of a gray spell there. She's coming out of postpartum and baby stuff, and I don't understand. I don't know. I don't understand all that stuff. But we had a bit of a season, and now from a 1 to a 10, it wasn't a 2 like it might have been in the past because my wife and I really, really struggled. Right. But if I didn't have time wealth, if I didn't have the ability to control my calendar, I don't know that we would have made it. So I think everything is a season. I think there's lots of different seasons that we have for different things. So right now, we weren't from a 1 to a 10 in my marriage. We got down to maybe as low as a 7, but that was a season, right? So we started pouring back into each other. We started making sure that we put God where he needs to belong in our relationship, and, made sure that we were investing in one another and talking nice to each other again and just making feel each other appreciated, and don't just try, but train. Don't just try to do something, but train to be a better husband, train to be a better wife, read books, educate yourself, take the time, all that stuff. Right. Well, now we're about a 9. right? We're not quite a 10 yet, like we were, but we're a 9 again, right? So
Mhm.
I think when you look at everything in your life that is truly a priority. Now, here's the other thing that I'm going to say is that not everything in your life can always be a priority, because Jim Collins, I think he said that at most you can have 3 priorities. I think human beings are far more complex than that. However, when you have too many priorities, it has the same effect as having no priorities. I'm going to say that again for emphasis. Maybe we can insert like a Law and Order
Yeah.
dong dong there, right? But but have, having too many priorities has the same effect as having no priorities, and that is the real problem when you try to say, well, I'm going to have all these different priorities. My kids are my priorities. My marriage is priorities. My God is a priority. My like, okay, that's fine. And my business, and again, out of the 4 core functions of business, you've got lead generation, you've got sales, you've got operations, you've got accounting. Lead gen, sales, operations, accounting, and you're trying to do all of those functions that, let's face it, no one person is appropriate to do all 4 functions, but you're trying to do lead gen and sales and operations, and guess what gets ignored? The accounting. Because it sounds like, well, I got more money in my bank account this month than last month, I must be doing okay, I don't need to do the
Yeah.
accounting.
Going in the right direction, at least, right?
And as embarrassing as that is for me to admit, I have an accounting degree and I said that. Oh, I got more money in my bank account this month than last month. I must be doing all right. I'm doing good.
I think
But
everybody said it at some point,
oh
right?
my gosh, man. Yeah, it's embarrassing. I mean, it's embarrassing for me because I've got no excuse. Um, but that was the thing where when you stop and recognize, okay, so for a season, like, hey, look, so if I'm going to do this on a 12-week cycle and say, hey, look, I want to build this up over the next 12 weeks, and I'm going to give myself a rest after that and say, hey, like, I'm going to take 2 weeks off and just and truly rest, and give yourself permission to rest and not feeling guilty about not working, right? Which, that's a thing, right? We sit at home and we ruminate, and we're anything but present. Well, that, I think it makes sense. I think most people can sprint for a period of time, but trying to sprint for 6 straight years, man, I don't think we're built that way. And I think that it's almost a sin to be that unhappy for that long just to grind it out when we're really not even promised the next day.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
So I
Yeah,
think to answer your question, I think you can, under certain parameters, and having a really honest discussion with the people around you that, hey, mommy or daddy has to, we're going to do this until April, but I promise April 15th, we've already booked the trip. We're going to Disney, and we're going to spend 10 days, and it's just going to be us. I'm not even going to bring my phone. I'm not going to work. I'm not going to do anything. How would you like something like that? And we're going to spend a little bit of time. Doesn't mean you have to wait till April to see daddy again, but we're going to spend a little bit of time in the evenings. We'll have Saturdays, a little bit of time, but we're going to do this for 10 straight days. How does that sound? Okay. Young kids may have trouble understanding that, but that's also a way to help hold yourself accountable when you have a life like that, where there's other people in your life where there's where they are priorities for you.
yeah, that's good. I think it was Gary Keller who talked about work-life balance, that it wasn't, this even-keeled line down the middle, but sometimes work was heavier and sometimes family was heavier. And the balance was that they balanced each other out over time. That you had periods where there was a lot of work, periods with a lot of family.
Yeah.
And I relate to that image of balance much better because my personality is not steady, right?
Well,
I'm on fire one day and the next day I'm dragging, and I have to accept that about myself to some degree.
well,
Uh,
and Chad, and be honest, do our families really want an equal amount of time with us?
yeah.
Like,
Well, good call. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, apparently there can be too much Mark. I've been told
You
that. I've been
sure
told
there's no
that.
other work that needs done? Are you
Are you
positive?
sure? Right. But I again, words are important to me, and I don't like to use the word balance. I mean, we're using it for, obviously, for the purpose of this conversation. I do like the word harmony, though. I think we
Mm,
can have harmony between our work lives and our home lives and our spiritual lives and all of these different things that are important to us. I do believe that there can be harmony, because I really don't know that there is balance. I think an unproductive version of me would be the worst version of me. And
Hmm.
I suspect that's probably true for you and for a lot of your listeners, that look, I mean, do you want to see me miserable? Have me sit on a beach chair and I don't have anything to do, like except to watch the seagulls. Like, I have to have a book. I need to be learning or engaging or digging holes in the sand or something that's where I can be fully present, either with someone or even if it's just being quiet within myself. But I even that I can only do for so long. Like, I need engagement, because for me, growth and contribution are very important needs for me.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
Yeah.
If I don't have something I'm working towards, or somebody I'm helping work towards their vision, then
Right.
I am not happy and feel lost.
Right.
So
Right.
I can sit still only so long.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. Yep.
So once somebody has that vision, they're starting to build their business, they're building it correctly. They understand there may be seasons of sacrifice, but that is a period and not a way of life that they have to accept for the next 30 years. What's the next step you recommend?
Right. So just to wrap up the vision piece with a bow. So it is personal vision and then business vision. The way that I view business vision, I'll do this somewhat quickly, but the business vision piece, I look at three C's, which helps define a business's vision. And that is three C's, which is core values, core purpose, and your ideal client avatar. So,
Hmm.
the core purpose is, what does the business do? And I know that you have a lot of real estate investors. I know many of them are buy and hold, right? But you have maybe some that maybe are fix and flippers and trying to get into it with a BRRRR method and whatever. But when I ask someone, what does the business do, and they say real estate, and I'm like, oh, cool, so you can get me a mortgage? They're like, oh no, I don't do that. Like, I'm confused. I thought you said you do real estate, right? Now, of course, I'm being shrill, but I'm like, but that's my point. Like, if I said, well, what is it you specifically do? I do residential properties from 3 bedroom to 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths in this school district, and that's my market. Oh, right. Like, there's no question what it is that you do. You're not dabbling in commercial. You're not dabbling in billboards. You're not dabbling over here. That was one of the things that Jack Welch, Neutron Jack of GE, he only brought GE into a market if they could be number one or number two in that market. And if they
Hmm.
couldn't be number one or number two in that market, they left the market. And one his advice is, don't dabble. And that makes a lot of sense. That always has made a lot of sense to me. And Jim Collins in Good to Great, he talks about the hedgehog concept. Don't, don't try the hedgehog only has to be good at one thing. You got the fox trying to be good at all these different things, but they were good at one thing. They knew what their core purpose was. They knew what it was they were about. So I would invite you to get really, really clear in terms of what it is that you're trying to do. And if you're like any other entrepreneur and you want to set up, let's face it, we have, every time we get out of the shower, we have 3 more business ideas. We're like, honey, we're going into the oil business, right? Like, no, you're not. We always have these crazy ideas in the shower, it seems. But get really specific about what it is you want to do. Build that business up, get the systems and running, get it so you don't have to mess with it anymore. Then go to your next business. Build one bridge at a time, right? So,
Yeah.
core purpose, core values, what specifically do you value? How would the world be worse off if you weren't in business anymore? That's a really important question to answer for yourself in terms of the core values of the business. And then, of course, the ideal client avatar. Who is it you want to serve? Who are you trying to what's this business even for? So if the world would be worse off without you, who is the person that would suffer because you weren't in business anymore, right? So when you get those 3 C's identified, then you can put together a 3-year business vision, a 1-year business vision. You break those up into 90-day chunks, a 90-day project, a 1-year, or a 90-day project, a 1-month goal, a monthly goal, weekly goals, and of course your daily 5, which is your activity. So all of that really quickly is around your business vision. Okay. So now we got vision, right? Now we've got the I and the P, VIP. So next is infrastructure. And the infrastructure is the bones of the business. It's the desks, the chairs, the software, the computers, the phone systems. Like I said, hopefully the phone system doesn't look like this. It doesn't look like a cell phone. It's the websites. It's all of the things that are the bones of the business that will help you run your processes, because you're going to create your processes next after you've
Mm.
created your infrastructure. Now, the thing is, you're going to develop your infrastructure with a mind towards your vision. Because if you, say for argument's sake, you build an infrastructure that where you're going to need to require, where you're required to return emails and phone calls in a timely manner, and your vision is to lay on the beach rubbing lotion on your belly, right? That's going to be a terrible experience for you when you're laying on the beach trying to rub lotion on your belly when you set up this infrastructure to return emails and phone calls in a timely manner, right? So that's why you want to create the vision first and then infrastructure. So when you create the infrastructure, and the infrastructure, this is kind of like a Sudoku puzzle. You don't need to figure it all out before you get it going. You just work on the pieces that where most of your intention is being drawn, right? So when you start creating processes that's going to run on the infrastructure that stays in alignment with your vision, you're going to create processes that someone else can do. Even if you're doing it at the time, you're going to create processes for the military guys out there, guys and gals. That's your SOP. That's your standard operating procedure. How is the phone answered? Is it answered hello, or is it answered thanks for calling ABC management? How can I help you? Or whatever the case may be. So
Hmm.
all of that stuff is broken out, kind of like in E-Myth fashion that Michael Gerber talked about in that landmark book. I know people are really into the book Traction. I think that book is way more advanced than what most people need. But still, in all, it does talk about systems and processes. But that's the kind of stuff that you think about as as you're building these things out towards a vision of whatever life that you're actually trying to accomplish.
Sure. I like it. So which side, if you're talking about the infrastructure,
Mhm.
which side do you lean on? I know some people recommend you work and deal with whatever infrastructure you have until you can afford a better infrastructure. Other people say invest day one for the infrastructure you need in the end, right? Which way do you lean on that?
So I maybe look at it a slightly different way. I'm going to want to build out the infrastructure um, based on where my attention is being drawn from. So I think most people, especially if you've got a good following of buy and hold investors, um, decent property management software is worth its weight in gold. If you're still doing your stuff manually or trying to keep track of stuff in QuickBooks is fine accounting software, but it is not property management software because it just doesn't do the same thing. You can't syndicate listings out to different websites through QuickBooks. It doesn't do that. That's not what it's for.
Mm.
Um, and trust me, as much as I love QuickBooks as an accounting person, it's just not designed for that function. So I really feel most of it's got to be based around a property management software. But here's the thing: is look at where you are the bottleneck. Any information that has to flow through you in order for something to happen, there's either a lack of process or a lack of infrastructure. Almost always. I mean, think of it in this way. Think of this analogy. If you had, let's pretend that there's a toll booth, right? Then the toll booth, you drive up and you throw a quarter in. Wait, inflation. You throw 5 Sacagawea in there, okay, or whatever, if you're in Newark. And what happens? If it's automated, it takes the money, and what happens? Gate goes up, right? Now,
Mhm.
that's good infrastructure, good process, right? So generally what tends to happen is people don't notice that that there's a bad process or bad infrastructure until it's missing or broken. Okay? So it let's pretend in this same scenario, you drive up, you throw your quarters in and the thing doesn't go up, right? Well, now you have to beef it up with process. Well, what does process mean? Process means someone has to go out and physically pick up the bar so you can drive through, right? So if the infrastructure is lacking or non-existent, that means you have to beef it up with process, which means it's a human being on a phone going, oh, okay, let me take your credit card number and let me type it into a computer and let me hit send and now because it doesn't update your balance, let me update the balance manually and let me make sure it hits the bank account. All of that stuff, that's all process driven. So I would argue that This is why it goes in order from vision to infrastructure, then process. Because if you have a lack of infrastructure, you have to beef it up with process. You have no choice, or the work doesn't get done. So I would say, look where information has to flow through you in order for something to happen. That's where you start to build infrastructure. And I'll give a great example. I had a lot of people that were calling me, and again, because I had 90 plus units at the time, people would call me to because they were interested in a vacancy that I had. Okay. Well, I was like, man, this is crazy. And of course, every single call would be 15 minutes or so because everybody had to tell me about their, well, I had an eviction because my cat had to get a whiskerectomy, and my landlord, he's a jerk, didn't want to fix nothing, whatever. I was okay.
Of course.
Never heard
Yeah.
that before. So anyway, every conversation was 15 minutes. Well, what I did was I set up an 800 number where people could call in. They hear on an automated message all of the available units and whatever available units they wanted. Oh, 801 sounds like one I'm interested in. 801, they heard a pre-recorded all the relevant information in my book. They talk about the 10 things that almost everybody, same 10 questions everybody asks, like how much is the rent? Like it was in the ad. Like, why are you asking me how much the rent is? Like where's it located? I'm like, it's in the ad. How do you not?
Right by the address.
Right. Like, how much is a security deposit? I'm like, it's in the, like, who helped you dial the phone? Like, come on, man. Are you that lazy? Did you just,
Yeah, it is
that much
amazing how
out?
they always ask the most obvious questions. I don't know why that is.
I was like, okay, so I answered in a script all the 10 most commonly asked questions. Can we work out the payment of the security deposit over time? What utilities are included? What's not included? Blah blah blah. All the same stuff, right? So that's automated. And then at the end, if they were interested, they press 0, and that's when it would get routed to me, right? That saved me hours per day, because up till that point, I was very process driven. Thanks for calling. Oh, you're interested in this property? Let me waste the next 15 to 20 minutes of my life, right?
Yeah.
So that's one little thing that I did. Now that may not be useful for everybody that watches. I mean, but keep in mind, I had 90, and it was me in a truck, right?
Well,
So
and I like the concept of the infrastructure on the front end and the process on the back end, because when you're doing the process, a lot of times you don't know how else you can do it, right?
Mhm.
That's the way you've been answering the phone. That's the way you've been handling listings. How else am I supposed to do it?
Right.
Right? It's so much more beneficial on the front end to say, here's how I would like this to work, or here's a tool I can implement so that listing properties will run really efficiently, um, and start that way, and then fill the process in later. I like that model a lot better.
It's and when you look at yourself as the information bottleneck and say, where is most of my time going? And you start paying attention to that, then you can start to say, oh, you know what? Maybe there is a better way to do this. Maybe, okay, fine. Maybe I'm going to give a little bit up in transactional fees, but I know that, by accepting property management software, because I tried it all. Oh, I'm going to give people my bank account information and then they can go and deposit the money. And trust me, I've done it. I've done all that stuff, right? It was a disaster. But once I started figuring out and bringing in infrastructure and baking that in the cake when I would underwrite properties, all of a sudden, and again, some of your people may struggle because their profitability is low because they paid too much for properties. Hang in there. It will catch up. Real estate is very forgiving that way. Okay. But if you can hang in there and get to where your equity is starting to, where the rents catch up with equity, you'll be fine. And that's exactly where I was. All I'm suggesting is that start to pay attention to where your time is going, and if you can build infrastructure around that, where you are the information bottleneck in order for something to happen.
And those investments that you make, whether it's property management software or whatever, even those, they seem expensive when you only have a few properties, but as you scale, obviously that cost is diminished.
Right.
I
It
was
amortizes
blessed,
over more
right,
time.
as you spread it over the portfolio.
Yeah.
I was blessed that I went ahead and got property management software at about 25 units.
Uh-huh.
I don't know how I made it to 25 without it. I was miserable at 25. And then once I started using, I use Appfolio, or that's
Yeah,
still
yeah,
what Office uses. That transformed my life. I mean, it was amazing how much more efficient it was. The tenants were happier. The people calling to look at the units were happier,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Everything was simpler and my time was reduced.
yeah,
So, for anybody struggling with whether to take the leap, yes, do
yeah,
it.
yeah.
You won't regret it for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, and the ones that I mentioned in the book, that's probably the one regret I have is I mentioned some property management software systems that I don't recommend anymore. Appfolio is absolutely fantastic. Um, they have really changed. Like back in the early days, I really wasn't super happy with them. They have really, really stepped up their game. They've done really, really well. I really like them. I really like. I mean, there's a lot of good ones out there. But the ones in the book, I just if your listeners end up getting the book, I just want them to know that that has changed. I don't recommend them anymore.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep.
So, how do you where do you fit, okay, in this model with the vision, um, infrastructure? Keep losing that word for some reason. Okay, the infrastructure and the process.
Uh huh.
Where do you include that first hire? Are they included in the infrastructure side and how you want to structure your business, or do you include them in the process? Where's that fall?
That's a really, really good question. So, when I'm building it out, like it's going to be different as you grow, right? Like I've been in business for a long time now. In my 51 years on this planet, I know a lot of ways to do things wrong. But again, this is about a season, right? So if you've got someone who's growing and they're 4 and 5 units, maybe that makes sense to have a virtual assistant that's in the Philippines that you only pay a couple dollars an hour to take some non-critical, non time sensitive tasks. The last thing you want to do is try to set up a Google phone that someone's going to answer in some third world country that maybe gets answered, maybe it doesn't, 24 hours a day. Meanwhile, you've got a $300,000 investment that's got 2 inches of sewage in the living room. Like those are the sorts of things that I don't like. Don't go cheap on that side of your infrastructure. But realistically, a lot of times where people can hand off stuff pretty easily is handling work orders, handling some administrative stuff. But to me, that is all process driven stuff. That is when you have built out where the vision is, what your personal vision is, what your business vision is. You start developing the infrastructure, and then you bring in the people. Once you've identified the processes, then you bring in the people to work the processes that's in the infrastructure that you created that's in alignment with your business and personal vision.
Okay.
Okay. Now, here's the difference. So I have a property management company which manages not only my portfolio but some properties for other people. And when my staff comes to me and they say, "Hey, we really like this piece of software. Can we get it?" And where am I? I work an hour a week in that business. So why should I say, "Oh, no, you need to stick with this"? I will look at it and say, "Okay, well, does this make sense? Is this in alignment with the vision? Is this going to get us to where we want to go?" Right now, the property management software that I have right now, I don't love it. I don't have to love it. I just need to know that it does the thing it's supposed to do, and that it keeps everything really easy for me. Right? It does what it's supposed to do for my clients. It does what I'm supposed to do for my residents. And then I'm good to go. So, there is a certain part where, like my operations manager, she does dictate certain things around certain operational functions, certain pieces of infrastructure. But I think you should always have a hand in that. If they want to identify processes, I kind of give them carte blanche to do what they need to do with processes. But when it comes to infrastructure, the infrastructure needs to change much slower. So I feel like, I don't know if I answered the question, but the at the crux of it, the work being done is going to be directed by the processes, not so much by the infrastructure.
Yeah, sure. Well, and I like that they have influence over the process. If they get the result by a different method,
Right.
you're just as happy as if they use your method.
Right. Right.
Sure.
Now there's certain things like, again, around, like meetings and things like that are going to be important. And those are processes. But I'm like, okay. And then I started to notice that like certain meetings the agendas were being changed, and things like that. I'm like, no, there's a reason for that. Like I want to keep the agendas the way they are, and that way I can follow that. Uh, but for the most part, realistically, I kind of let them dictate their own work. And many of them, especially for your listeners, they're going to be 1099s. They're not going to be actual employees. So you may have to be a little bit more flexible in terms of the certain things that you're going to have them do, having them show up for certain meetings and those sorts of things. But realistically, I do like it that the process kind of dictates what the work is being done. That's going to be run on that infrastructure that's created.
Sure. I like it. I like it, Mark. You got me thinking, I'm kind of turning through some processes and wondering how we can change some things. So I appreciate everything you've brought today. And
Sure,
I
man.
know everybody listening is probably thinking through a lot of ideas as well.
Yeah,
So
that's awesome.
I
Yeah.
appreciate you taking the time and coming on.
It's been fun, man. I really appreciate you. I geek out on this stuff. And that's why one of the things that I really enjoyed about niching up a little bit and being a more of a strategist, I end up figuring out too is that, I'm not just a business coach. I'm not just a life coach. I'm not a, whatever. I'm a strategist. And tying that back into their personal lives is really the most important thing for me. So at the end of the day, I know the last, you know, 30 minutes or so we've talked about business, but at the end of the day, this is about feeling fulfilled and not just getting hung up on your achievements. Oh, I got 40 units, I got 50 units. Like being the most, being the guy or the gal with the most number of units at your local RIA group, man, that's just that is, I don't know how fulfilled you're going to feel, like no one really at the end of the day is going to care that much. And how fulfilled are you going to feel by having those number of units? Whereas being able to go on the trip, being able to be completely present with your family or your friends or the people that really do totally matter to you, that's the stuff that really winds my clock. So I love everything that we talked about, but remember, don't forget at the end of the day what the real vision is.
Yeah, that's awesome. Starting with the end in mind and
Yep.
and remembering what actually matters.
Yep. Yep.
So yeah,
Yep.
I love
Good
it. I
stuff.
love the perspective. We share that 100%.
I love it. I love it.
So I appreciate you. For people who want to find out more about you or want to take you up on the offer of your book, how can they do that?
Yeah. So it's not a free book. I just want to be clear on that. You just pay for shipping. It's like $9 or something like that. So just go on to landlordcoach.com. There's something under resources, and then you can see there's an offer there. Just fill in your information, and if you want, I'll even sign it. Then you couldn't even give it away. So, but I'll even sign it with your name on it if you want. But it's all I ask is you cover shipping. But I can get that out to you if you're looking for a copy of the Time Wealthy Investor 2.0. But if you'd like to have a conversation with me, if you've got maybe something else, even if you're thinking about getting into business, man, I just love chatting with people, and I have the time wealth to be able to do that. So you can head over to markdolfini.com and schedule a call with me. I'll be happy to talk to you about pretty much anything you guys want to talk about. There's really nothing that I'm shy to talk about. But either landlordcoach.com for the book or markdolfini.com, and we can have a conversation.
Awesome. I encourage everybody to do that. Mark is a genuine, transparent guy, and I know you'll be glad you do. We'll include the links in the show notes, so you can find that resource there. Once again, Mark, appreciate you coming on. Enjoy the conversation. I know we could talk all day, and I've got plenty of other questions rolling through my head, but I appreciate you taking the time and sharing what you did.
This was a lot of fun, Chad. Yeah, I appreciate you.
Yeah. Everybody else, thank you always for listening. I appreciate you. And keep building your dream life one door at a time. We are adding new episodes every week, so make sure and subscribe and check out all of our content at truewealthinvestors.com.